Yeah.
We got a packed show this morning, so let's bring in our political panel. We're joined today by Whitley Yates. She's a Republican strategist and Project 21 ambassador. Also joining us is Brad Palumbo. He's a fellow at the Steamboat Institute, blankly a group inspiring active involvement in the defense of liberty. That sounds so beautiful.
I love
Good morning.
it. Good morning to you both. Welcome.
Morning.
Well, let's start with Iran and Israel. A third U.S. Navy destroyer is now in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and a second U.S. carrier strike group is moving toward the Arabian Sea. So clearly, the U.S. is ramping up its presence in the Middle East. Now, we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He had a meeting yesterday with his UK counterpart, both agreeing that, quote, Iran can never develop or acquire a nuclear weapon, end quote. And the moves are said to be all defensive, according to the Pentagon. As the president decides on military action, the next 2 weeks will be critical for the U.S. and the world. So, Whitley, I'll start with you first, please. How do you see this playing out in regards to what we're seeing unfolding?
I think it's very wise of America to start moving people in positions in order to create a defensive stance. We do have an ally in Israel, and while we haven't decided to intervene quite yet, making sure that America is protected, and if we do intervene, that we are in a prime position is ideal.
You know, Brad, what do you make of some of these Republicans and talking heads pushing back on Trump taking action? Because this goes way beyond the conflict solely between Iran and Israel. This is about America's national security interest. It will serve no one's interest other than Iran if it actually gets a nuclear weapon, because that will be a threat to the entire globe. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, two things can be true at one time. And one is that pretty much everyone agrees that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. It's a terrible outcome and something we all want to avoid. But two, I think President Trump very explicitly ran on no new wars, and some Republican critics are entirely right to want to avoid the prospect of getting drawn into another entrenched military conflict in the Middle East, where, you know, thousands of U.S. soldiers could die like they did in Iraq and our other wars, and we could waste trillions. So if there's some way to ensure that maybe Israel going alone is able to wipe out Iran's nuclear capacity without bleeding into a full-scale war, that's what President Trump has to kind of triangulate here. Now, with the other pushback he's getting from congressional Republicans, some that I think is valid, is the idea that if you are going to do a U.S. military strike on Iran, that is something I do believe, under our Constitution, you would need to get authorized by Congress, because it would be an act of war. And I know many past presidents haven't exactly followed this, but under our Constitution, Congress is supposed to declare war. The president isn't supposed to be able to just commit massive military strikes that constitute an act of war without congressional approval. So if Trump wants to do that, he should seek approval from Congress first.
Now, Whitley, we've seen from the previous administrations, Biden, it is Biden, I might as well say that, makes sense to me, how there was appeasement going on when it came to Iran. And in my view, they did not take them seriously. And we have President Trump saying he wants peace and he wants no more death and no more destruction. Can you talk about the dynamics between the past versus the present?
You know, I find that really interesting because I'm not quite sure we would be here had the Obama administration not given billions to Iran when they were sanctioned, and keeping those sanctions on. I do believe providing them with that money, removing those sanctions, have led us to where we are now. And so you have Biden and Obama both placating to Iran and not necessarily thinking that they would be some type of a formidable enemy, not against us per se or against our allies. And now here we are with hypersonic missiles being shot into Tehran. And so I think that the Biden and Obama administration have helped throw gasoline on this issue that we have right now, consistently funding Iran. Now you have the Trump administration basically saying, you need to come play ball with us and you need to come quickly. He gave them 60 days, and here we are at the 62nd day where Iran has not come to the table. And so what needs to happen is that Iran needs to come to the table quickly before President Trump decides whether or not America will intervene, because it's not going to be a pretty picture if America does decide to intervene in this war.
That's true. And President Trump is also intervening on shore. And actually, the courts backed him up. A court of appeals siding with President Trump, allowing him to keep control of the National Guard troops in Los Angeles. The move puts California Governor Gavin Newsom in his place. The president posting on Truth Social stating this: big win in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on the president's core power to call in the National Guard. The judges obviously realized that Gavin Newsom, excuse me, folks, is incompetent and ill-prepared. But this is much bigger than Gavin, because all over the United States, if our cities and our people need protection, we are the ones to give it to them, should state and local police be unable, for whatever reason, to get the job done. Brad, this is leadership. And to my surprise, of all appeals court, the Ninth Circuit backed Trump. Were you surprised?
Well, I a little bit, but I was heartened to see that this decision actually included a Biden-appointed judge. So that gives me confidence that the Trump administration must be on pretty sound legal territory if both Trump-appointed and Biden-appointed judges agreed with this unanimous decision to stay this and allow Trump to continue being in charge of the National Guard in California. Now, I will say that I think this relationship between him and Newsom, who he calls Newscum in this post, has descended into juvenile antics. And it's not what we need for America, for them to be trading barbs on social media. We need them to come together to make sure that people are not being hurt and things aren't being burned in the street. But I understand why the Trump administration doesn't trust Gavin Newsom to just handle it himself with local law enforcement. I mean, how did that go in the summer of 2020 when dozens of people were killed in Black Lives Matter riots and over $1 billion in property damage was done? So listen, sending in the National Guard against the governor's wishes should be a last resort. But I can understand why the Trump administration would take such a step when Democratic governors like Gavin Newsom have mishandled these kinds of incidents so woefully in the past.
Yeah, especially given the fact that ICE agents, government agents, were being attacked.
No, absolutely. And to your point, Brad, look, we had Maxine Waters saying there was no violence, and other Democrats and these liberal networks saying it was mostly peaceful. Meanwhile, we have all these visuals and images and videos of the mob taking over the streets. Whitley, your thoughts on that?
You know, you really cannot trust Gavin Newsom or those elected in California to keep not only the city, but the state safe. And we've seen it time and time again, whether the city was actually physically on fire and needing help and needing leadership, or if they were protesting, rebelling, and now rioting against the city and against law enforcement officers. We cannot trust the leadership of Gavin Newsom, which is why the National Guard had to be called in the first place. Once the leadership rises to the occasion to protect people, property, and those that are putting their lives on the line, I don't think we're going to see the National Guard having to intervene. But until that happens, I do believe President Trump was in the right to send the National Guard and protect those that are attempting to protect us.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I have to get this last topic in. Hard to believe, but there are some people in the U.S., namely restaurants and some servers, who don't like the GOP's no tax on tips budget proposal. The Independent Restaurant Coalition is now urging Congress to rethink the plan. Now, Brad, at the root of their position is that it doesn't help, let's say, the cooks, the dishwashers, and other workers within the restaurant, and solely focuses on the servers. Well, that's the intent and purpose. You know, in America, we believe in mobility. You start off, let's say, in the kitchen, and then if you want to make more money, you actually move out and become a server.
Right.
What's wrong with that? Why do everything with Democrats and some people in the middle think that everything has to be extremely equal?
Well, I think what the problem is, listen, I want everybody to pay lower taxes, frankly, and that includes wait staff. But when you're treating similarly situated positions very differently under our tax code, I do think that's kind of unfair. I mean, a person who earns the equivalent of $12 or $15 an hour in one capacity, working as a hostess, is going to get hit with federal taxes up to a certain threshold, and then a person who earns basically the same amount of money but through tips is going to be tax exempt. Seems kind of arbitrary and unfair to me, actually. And I think rather than these special carve-outs that are in, many of the Trump administration or Republicans' tax policies, just lower the rates overall for everyone is what I would prefer to see.
You know what? If you had to serve my sister at a restaurant, you deserve every bit of no taxes. And I love you, sis, but it is what it is. Whitley Yates and Brad Palumbo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.